Morning guys, welcome back to the vlog. The next 2 days are going to be quite exciting because we are taking part in the Death and Dying Symposium where we are learning how to break bad news. It's going to be 2 solid days of kind of working with actors who are trained to like cry on demand, and yeah, we're just going to learn the techniques on how to tell people that they're dying, how to tell people their loved ones are dying, and generally how to be better doctors. Alright guys, so this is the 2-day Death and Dying course, and I'd like to introduce you to Steve, who's one of the CCS, the Clinical Communication Skills Coordinators.
Okay, so we've got a 2-day course which is a mixture of lectures and experiential sessions. The purpose of it is to get you as a medical student to think about challenges that you will face when you're in your early years as a doctor. The idea is for you to get as much experience and exposure to these things as we can provide.
Okay, so we're fast forwarding a few weeks into the future because I want to explain a little bit more in depth about what goes on in our communication skills sessions and some of the stuff we learnt about breaking bad news and about dealing with patients towards their end of life in palliative medicine.
In April next year, and she's saying she's looking forward very much to me walking her down the aisle. Do you think I'll be able to do that?
So, before we talk about that, can I just find out how much you've been told about your condition so far?
So here, Paul is assessing the patient's starting point, and this is always the first step in any kind of breaking bad news type situation. We've all heard horror stories of doctors who haven't seen a patient before going onto the wards and saying, talking to them about the next step in their cancer treatment, and the patient is like, oh, what cancer? Because no one had told them before that they actually had cancer in the first place, and these are situations we definitely want to be avoiding. So step number 1 in breaking bad news, always establish a patient's starting point, which Paul has done very well over here. I will definitely answer your question, and we'll try and work out what we can do. But first, I just need to ask you a little bit more about what you've been told about your condition.
I've been told that my heart is...
Another thing that's good to do while breaking bad news is to throw out warning shots, because what we don't want to do is to drop the bombshell of the bad news on the patient in one go. We want to kind of build them up to expect that it's coming. So the first thing that we can do is take them into a side room, and they always say that you should never break bad news when someone's in the corridor or when someone's in the ward. If possible, we want to be taking them to a side room, and just the act of doing that is kind of a warning shot in itself, because the patient knows that, okay, something serious is coming. And one other way of doing it is to ask the patient to explain in their own words how their condition has been deteriorating over time. So for example, you might ask, 6 months ago, how were you feeling relative to how you're feeling now? And then they would kind of explain the deterioration, and that in itself would also be a warning shot that they would know that, okay, they would know in themselves that their condition is not improving, that it's getting worse. And we want to be getting these expectations in early so that when we do break the bad news, it doesn't come as too much of a surprise to the patient. So we're definitely going to do everything we can to try and keep you going until then. But I do have to be honest with you, with the state of your heart and your other health problems. April is a long way away, and with the state of your heart and everything else, we're not sure if you'll make it until then. So after each student has their turn with the role player, they come back into the circle and everyone gives them feedback. So at the start, they work out a few things that they want to focus on. So in all of my sessions, I always ask people to look out for if I'm talking too fast, because that's something I have a tendency to do. So we come back into the circle and we discuss with the role player who's still in character, and with everyone else what we did well, what we could have done differently.
I thought it went all right.
Yeah.
I would have liked to give you a number, but I feel like you weren't really asking for a number, and I didn't want to kind of just...
As a doctor, if you put yourself in his shoes, actually with the information which would really help him would be to actually name the priority, your priorities that you want to be at your daughter's wedding. So we should work towards making sure that you are at your daughter's wedding, and for that to happen, you need to have a good grasp of how severe your condition is.
Also, CCS stuff can sometimes be quite heavy, especially in a session like this where we're breaking bad news. We're telling this guy that he's not going to make it to his daughter's wedding. So I think having like a group of friends there to kind of do it together is a really nice way of going about it. I feel like if it were kind of one-to-one, that would be a little bit too intense maybe. We do have one-to-one occasionally, a couple of times a year, but in general CCS is done as part of a group. And we all obviously take it seriously, but we can also kind of have a bit of a laugh, a bit of a joke around, just to not make it too much, if that makes sense. We had a really friendly group, supportive group, and it's kind of a safe space where you can make mistakes, and yeah, you might joke about it in the group, but you trust that no one's gonna really badmouth you to your friends, to your colleagues and stuff. So I really like CCS personally. It's good fun, and we also learn quite a lot as well. So what you've seen so far was our first session of the morning. The second session was where we had to discuss DNA CPR. That's do not attempt cardiopulmonary resuscitation. That's one of those interesting things where technically, whether or not we do CPR on a patient if their heart does stop, technically that's a medical decision. The patient can't demand to be resuscitated. But having said that, we still have that conversation with them where we explain what we think is in their best interests and, you know, take their opinion and their family's opinion into account. So that can be quite a tricky conversation at times, because you can imagine if you're telling a patient that, a lot of times patients can interpret that as that we're giving up on them or that we're not going to do our best to treat them in other ways. But like in reality, CPR is so rarely successful. I think the figures are about like 7% success rate. CPR is not as life-saving a measure as it can seem on Grey's Anatomy and things. And actually, someone has actually done a study where they looked at the survival rate of CPR in television dramas versus in real life and found there was a massive disparity. Generally, it's that conversation that we have to have with the patient. So this was quite a tricky one, and that was what the afternoon session was about.
But for some people, especially if they have underlying health problems, it can do more harm than good, to be honest.
So that was day one of our Death and Dying course. We also had a few lectures kind of scattered in about treatment of patients towards the end of life, about palliative care. So we're going to cut to a shot of past tense me talking about what some of these lectures were about and kind of sharing my thoughts on it at the time. We had two lectures which were both really, really good. The first one was about managing breathlessness as a symptom towards the end of life. So apparently breathlessness is a symptom that lots of patients experience, and counterintuitively, oxygen doesn't help, although everyone thinks oxygen helps. And the consultant in palliative care was just kind of taking us through the evidence, and you know, it seems as if it's the non-pharmacological approaches that really do help. So for example, blowing a fan in your face is a far better way of relieving breathlessness than just putting loads of oxygen on. Apparently drugs like benzodiazepines aren't that useful either. It tends to be more the non-drug approaches that do make a difference towards the end of life. But sadly, those are the ones that require time and engagement on the part of both the doctor and the patient, which means unfortunately in a lot of NHS hospitals they're not really done that much. So she was just trying to get us to appreciate that those are the important things. The second lecture we had was wonderful. It was from this awesome consultant in A&E medicine. She was talking about the ethics of end-of-life care. So things like assisted suicide and euthanasia and DNA CPR forms and how you deal with these conversations. And we were going through some cases in the law that have kind of really shaped the way the law is handled in the UK. So that was super, super interesting. So that was day one of our Death and Dying course. Day two was actually even more challenging than day one. But before we go there, we're going to have a little montage to the standard epic music of Catherine cooking some Thai green curry, which we had for dinner that evening. And yeah, I hope you enjoy this quick montage of food. Here we go. Oh my goodness, these onions.
Ladies and gentlemen of the vlog, what do we think about this here belly? Go on, suck it in, son. Suck it in. That's it.
It's at least like 24 weeks. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that cheeky little montage of cooking. My mum sometimes says that my vlogs of life as a medical student are more cooking and food vlogs than they are medical student stuff, but hey, I enjoy filming and editing those sequences. They'll be fun to look back on in a few years' time. So now we're going to finish off this episode by going back to me from the past, where I was talking about what we learnt on day two of the course. Okay, so we've just finished day two of the Death and Dying course. The morning was quite interesting. We were tasked with telling a patient, so this was an actual patient obviously, that her son, her 21-year-old son, had died in a car accident. So that was super challenging because each of the six of us practiced telling the patient, and each time she responded in a slightly different way. So for one of the people, she broke down crying. For another one, she was just kind of shell-shocked silent. For a third, she was quite kind of blaming and angry and all of that. So it was really useful to kind of get experience of that, because this whole kind of breaking bad news, especially in the event of a sudden death of someone really young, telling a mother that her son has died in a car accident, that's like a super big deal. So the fact that we kind of got some practice of it now in our final year before having to do it in real life. I think that was super useful. After that, we had a lecture about palliative care at home. So there are some patients who are in the last few days of their life, or last few weeks or months of their life, who would prefer to die at home rather than in hospitals. And the point that Dr. Barclay, the lecturer, made was that in the last 100 years or so, we've really over-medicalized and institutionalized death and birth as well. Back in the day, most births and deaths happened at home. Now most births and deaths happen in a hospital. Anyway, when patients are approaching their end of life, we ideally want to keep them out of hospital because, it's expensive to keep people in hospital, and out of hospital, patients often prefer to die at home. So we were going over the various things that we can do, sort of working with Macmillan nurses, Marie Curie nurses, hospice workers, social care, hospice at home, that sort of thing, to kind of make patients comfortable in their last days of life while they're at home. And then in the afternoon, we had a communication skills session talking to the wife of a patient who was dying and kind of answering her questions. So in the scenario that I got, she was asking things like, will he be in distress? She can hear some rattling breathing, the death rattler that's colloquially known, and she was kind of naturally worried about this. In another one of the scenarios, the person's wife was saying that she really doesn't want to have the body at home at all, and we should just call an ambulance and take it away. And at that point, we had to kind of explain to her that actually, he probably wouldn't survive a trip to hospital, and really just trying to explore her concerns, find out why she was worried about keeping him at home, and then use that knowledge to try and kind of bring her around to the idea that it's okay that her husband dies at home because that's what he wanted. So that brings us to the end of the 2-day death and dying course. I think overall it's been really, really useful. Breaking bad news is always something that I feel medical students are scared of, and even I remember when applying for medicine, the idea of having to do like a station breaking bad news in an MMI, that was really quite scary. And from teaching interviews for the last 5 years, that's like the one station that I know every student is dreading, that, oh, how do you break bad news? So we've just had some intensive practice of it in our final year, and I think it's been really useful in preparing us for life as junior doctors. If you've watched this far, then thank you so much for watching. You're amazing. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. More vlogs coming up every week, along with applying to medicine videos if you're into that sort of thing. Have a lovely day, and I will see you next time. Bye.